Salve, welcome to this video lesson on Chapter 7, Capitulum Septimum, and we're starting in Section 2. I'm going to briefly go over this first paragraph here, starting Ecce Iulius, because we actually had a peek at that in the last video. Ecce Iulius, look, Iulius, ad villam advenit, arrives at the villa. Servi lecticam ante ostium ponunt, the slaves place the litter, or sedan chair, in front of that door. Pater filio salutat, the father greets the sons. Salve te filii, hello sons. Et a filii salutatur, and he is greeted by the sons. Notice the passive verb salutatur. Salve pater, hello father. Okay, Iulius ambulat ad ostium, he walks to the door. Quod ab ostiario aperitur, which is opened, aperitur, passive verb again, by the ostiarius. Now, you might be able to guess what an ostiarius is. That's a new word, right? It says in the margin, servus qui ostium aperit et claudet, a slave who opens and closes the ostium. Ostium's a door, so what do we call this guy in English? Doorman, porter, butler, something like that, okay? Dominus per ostium in villam intrat. The master enters into the villa through the door. Post eum veniunt Cyrus et Leander. After him come Cyrus and Leander. Qui duo sacos portant, who are carrying the two sacks. Ostiarios, posteos, ostium, claudet. The doorman, ostiarius, closes the door behind them, posteos. Ursus et Davus cum lectica vacua discedunt. Ursus and Davus depart or leave, discedunt, with the empty litter. Okay? So, good deal. They probably have a place to store the litter, maybe in a shed, barn building, or something like that outside of the villa. Purri sacos plenos, quia servis portantur vident. The boys see, vident, the full sacks, sacos plenos, which are carried by the slaves. Okay, so the qui clause there, that's a relative clause, as we've seen many times before, describing the sacks, which are carried, portantur is a passive verb, by the slaves. Et interrogant, and they ask, the boys ask, quid in est in sacis? What in is in the sacks? That sounds a little funny. Notice in the margin they're showing you in est is made from in, and est, which means is. So you put it together, it means in is. What in is in the sacks? And a little funny thing about Latin, we already saw it with ad villam advenit up above. A lot of times you get prefix verbs, and then whatever the prefix is will be repeated as a separate preposition in Latin. So comes to the house, and then here in is in the sacks. Latin just does that. You don't have to repeat it in English. In fact, you shouldn't, because it sounds stupid in English to say what in is in the sacks, or what is in the sacks. That's dumb, right? So just say it once in English, even though it appears as a prefix and as a preposition in Latin. So the boys want to know what's in the sacks. Now you can see in the margin a picture of a malum. Notice the long A on malum. So malum with a short A would mean a bad thing, neuter of the adjective malus. Malum with a long A means apple. So malum means bad apple. Long marks are important, right? Because a bad thing versus an apple, there's a difference there. Julius respondet. Julius responds. In sacco quem Leander portat mala insunt. In the sack, which Leander is carrying, not mapples. I'm seeing the M. Apples are in. Okay? In the English word order, apples are in the sack, which Leander carries. Hic sacum pone, Leander. Put the sack here, Leander. Leander sacum ponet ante Iulium. Leander places the sack in front of Julius, qui aperet eum, who opens it. Now notice in the margin they show you eum and then the ... sacum. That tells you that the pronoun eum refers to sacum. Now you might have remembered that eum means him, but really it's just a masculine pronoun, right? And in Latin, since sacus is a masculine word, you've got to say eum, and here it's going to mean it because we don't call a sack a him, right? So the gender of the pronoun refers to the gender of the Latin word, not the gender that we think of in English. Just a thing to watch out for. Then Julius says, Videte puri, see boys, hic sacus plenus malorum est. This sack is full of apples. Okay, and notice malorum has that genitive plural orum ending. We learned back in chapter 2. So thus the of translation. And that makes sense to us and well enough because we do say full of. Okay, so plenus, full, malorum of apples. On to the next page. Julius malum e sacco sumit et ad se vertit ad Marcum. Sorry, not et se vertit ad Marcum. Julius picks up an apple from the sack, or out of the sack, and he turns himself, vertit se, towards Marcus. Ecce malum tuum, Marce. Look, your apple, Marcus. Julius Marco malum dat. Julius gives the apple to Marcus. Now here we have a new case. It's called the dative case. Marco there, it looks like it's ablative because a lot of times dative and ablative look the same, but not always. We'll see in feminine words they're different. The context really helps us with recognizing that Marco is dative. Datives tend to be with give, show, or tell verbs. So dot means gives. Show would be monstrat, is shows. Tell might be dicit, which is to tell or say, or perhaps narrat, which is tell in the sense of tell a story. These kinds of verbs, give, show, tell verbs, will have a dative for the person to whom you give, show, or tell a thing. So Julius gives the apple, malum is the accusative direct object, to Marcus, that's the dative, Marco. One thing I want to note here is that we also call that an indirect object sometimes in English. If you've studied much English grammar, maybe you got a good English teacher who taught you some grammar, you might have heard the term direct object like malum here, and then indirect object like Marco here. Gives the apple, that's what he gives. To Marcus, that's the person to whom he gives it. Okay, so again, Marco, dative case, new in this chapter. Pater filio suo magnum malum dat. The father gives a big apple, that's our direct object, to his son, filio suo. There's our dative indirect object. Iam Marcus malum habet. Now Marcus has an apple. Neque Quintus malum habet. Nor does Quintus have an apple. Julius Quintum ad se vocat. Julius calls Quintus to him. Et ei malum dat. And he gives an apple ei to him. Now ei, they show you in the margin, is a pronoun referring to Quinto, right? In other words, the dative case of Quintus. That's why we translate it and gives the apple to him. I will note here in English you can show a indirect object by word order too. You could say and gives him the apple, and that means the same thing as and gives the apple to him. So for indirect objects in English, we don't have a dative ending like Latin does, but we can either put the indirect object before the direct object, or we can put it after and use to. So gives the apple to him or gives him the apple. Julius Quinto malum dat. Julius gives the apple to Quintus. There's Quinto, dative case again. Iam et Marcus et Quintus mala habent. Now both Marcus and Quintus have apples. Marcus then says, Quid inest in sacco, Siri? What is in the sack, Cyrus? Or of Cyrus, the sack of Cyrus. Siri here is the genitive case. So of Cyrus, or you could say, what is in Cyrus's sack? Julius then says, in sacco eius, in his sack, Pira insunt. There are pears inside. Okay? In his sack there are pears. And we see the pirum in the margin. Just like malum, the word pirum is a neuter word. So the plural nominative and accusative is pira, which we see in the sentence here. Aperisacum sure. Open up the sack, Cirrus. Videte puri. See, boys? Hic sacus plenus est pirorum. Pirorum is again a genitive plural, just like malorum, which we had earlier. This sack is full of pears. Julius duo pira e sacco sumet. Julius takes or picks up 2 pears, duo pira, from the sack or out of the sack. Ecce pirum tuum Marce. Look, your pear Marcus. Et tuum Quinte. And yours Quintus. One quick thing here, just as a reminder, we've seen a and ob, which work like a and before. I should note that a and x also work this way. So a, which is a long e, as in a sacco here, and then x, which is ex, short e. Those mean the same thing, but just like a and an in English, the a, which is the long e, right, comes before a consonant, whereas x comes before a vowel. All right, going on in line 55, pater filii suis pira dat. The father gives pears to his sons. Filii suis, again, it looks like an ablative because a lot of times datives and ablatives are the same. In fact, in the plural, they're always the same for all Latin nouns. So, filii suis, we can tell by the context here with dot, which means gives. Filii suis has got to be the dative case, gives to his sons. One thing I don't think I mentioned before, dot means gives, and that's where the dative case comes from. Dativus in Latin comes from the verb for giving, so it's like the giving to case, if you want to think of it that way. And again, the most common place to see the dative is with give, show, or tell verbs. Filii qui jam non solum mala, sed etiam pira habent. The sons who now not only have apples, but also pears, laeti sunt, are happy. So here we see a correlative expression. It tells you in the margin that solum is a synonym for tantum, meaning only. And if you put the non solum with the sed etiam later on in a clause or a sentence, non solum means not only, and the sed etiam means but also. Those are correlative expressions, which just means they work together, not only X, but also Y. Here we have not only apples, but also pears. So when you see a non solum or non tantum, you can expect you're probably going to get a sed etiam later. All right, continuing at 56, into the line. Servi autem, neque mala, neque pira habent. The slaves, however, have neither apples nor pears. Neque is another correlative. In English, we say neither nor. In Latin, you use the same word for both. Neque. Quintus says, etiam servis da mala et pira pater. Also give apples and pears to the slaves. Servis is the dative. Father. Okay, so Quintus, being a nice kid, he wants his dad to also share with the slaves. They've done all this hard work carrying the sacks and carrying the master back home. Julius suram et Leandrum servus ad se vocat. Julius calls Cirrus and Leander, the slaves, to him. Et iis, and to them. Iis is the dative plural pronoun. Mala et pira dat. He gives apples and pears. Dominus servis mala et pira dat. The master gives to the slaves apples and pears. Or you can just say gives the slaves apples and pears. Servis again, dative case. Well, I hope you've learned some things. We've got some new vocabulary like the non solum sed etiam and dot, neque. We've got the new dative case like filio or filiis, servis. Those are some examples we've seen. And that means to somebody typically. And we get it with give, show, tell verbs. Walete, till next time.